Hello, everyone. We're here with the co-founder and CEO of OPGames. And Chase Freo is a friend of mine. He's actually an alumnus from Cohort 3 of the Accelerator. So, in short, what would you say that OPGames does? And how would you say that it makes you feel to be a part of this great undertaking?
All right. So first off, good morning or good evening, everyone, wherever you guys might be listening in this part of the world. In terms of like what OP Game does, we do a lot of things, but I think the main premise of why OP Games exist is that we want to be able to become that bridge for game developers from Web 2 to transition into Web 3. And I think that's kind of like this prevailing ethos that we have in the company in general, that we want to be able to help as much game developers as possible to really take part in this new wave of economics that's sort of like booming within the Web3 and crypto space. And I think that being able to actually be that bridge for them to realize this grander, much more exciting world of crypto and blockchain is really something that we wanted to be able to actually do for everyone.
Very cool. Well, sometimes I think we can get too big too fast. So let's start small. What were you like as a kid? And when you were younger, did you ever imagine that you would be an entrepreneur or that you would one day be sitting here doing this?
No, not at all, not at all. So how was it like as a kid? It was a typical childhood. I grew up in the Philippines. My dad is in the military, and so he was assigned in like different places in the Philippines. So I grew up in the southern part of the Philippines. There's usually conflicts at that time, back in the 80s. Well, throwing away my age, but like back in the 80s and early 90s, like there's like, insurgencies, conflicts within the south of the Philippines. And so it was fun, but at the same time chaotic every once in a while, especially when there's like looming threats of like bombings or anything like that. So I grew up there for 13 years. And then after that, we moved into the capital. I was fairly reserved. I was essentially, I wouldn't say like an outcast, but rather really quiet in general. I don't have a lot of opinions growing up. I rather keep it to myself. I rarely get into conflicts, but I think that at some point in the future, growing up in the Philippines, you kind of realize that what I think that you kind of have to be more involved a little bit, and so that's kind of like where my entrepreneurial awakening sort of like happened. So I I went to college in the Philippines and then moved to Singapore to start a career in finance. And I realized that finance is okay, but it wasn't for me. And so I moved to China soon after Singapore, and that's kind of like where I traveled the country by train, all 30 plus provinces of China, except for some places where I wasn't allowed to go in at that time. And I stumbled upon gaming in the western part of China called Chengdu, and that's kind of like where I started realizing that there's actually more than just working for other people, and that you can actually be in control of like the stuff that you can do for others and the stuff that you can do for yourself. And in 2017, 2015, I met some of my co-founders. At that time, it was Gabby from YGG and Paul, who's still my CTO in the company. We decided to actually band together and create this company called Alto.io. And in the beginning, I was like, yeah, you know what? I don't think this is for me. I don't think I'm an entrepreneur. I'm mostly into gaming and game publishing in general. But I think like a big part of like how this happened for me was actually because of Paul and Gabby. When I met them, they were actually developers trying to get their games published, and I was a game publisher. But I think more than that, I saw this level of freedom and that ability to be able to actually do something in your own terms, not just for yourself, but for other people as well, depending on what your mission is. And that kind of like drew me into entrepreneurship. And I think that's kind of like how I started really. I was fairly new. This is actually my first startup. OPGames is my first startup. And in the beginning, it was like all kind of like really great visuals in my head about like, oh my God, I'm going to get funded after 6 months. And then we're going to grow after a year. And then 2 years after, we're going to be like doing our Series A and stuff like that. It was further from the truth. Like, that's not exactly how it happened. But I'm glad that, like I went on that journey because entrepreneurship does require a lot of sacrifice. It does require a lot of, I would say, choices that needs to be made, so to speak. And, I'm just glad that, it led me through choices that led me to where I am now, talking to you and, being able to actually run a company of 30 now at this point, and growing, and being able to actually create something that hopefully would make a whole lot of difference in a lot of game developers' lives. So that's kind of like my journey. I'm a small town kid, and sort of like moved into the world in general, and got into the world of crypto and gaming as well. So I think I couldn't be more thankful.
Wow, there's an image of this type A capitalist cowboy when it comes to entrepreneurship, and there's this sense that infinite grit, somewhat of a self-hating, gritty mindset is what you need to accomplish big things.
Yeah.
There's an idea that geniuses come actually from those places where people are disadvantaged, and the geniuses themselves might not be the nicest people, but that's okay because they deliver a lot of things. We have these stereotypes and generalizations, but I think it's important to actually show people like you in public light, because then others will know, wow, this guy did his first startup and it seems to go pretty well. Yeah. Oh, wow, this guy was just like me at a certain point, and maybe I could rise up and be a leader too. So that all being said, I feel as though blockchain itself is about decentralization. Philosophically, it's about moving power and assets from centralization to decentralization, with the belief that as a community, all of us in the world can make decisions together and support each other and reach understandings, even without needing to establish contract-based trust. And so this all sounds to me like a dream, because I studied politics in college and I studied revolutions, and I'm thinking, well, it seems like we have monetary systems with cash, we have central banks, we're just moving on to the age of code. But I know that this transition is somewhat scary for people because we've relied on institutions, and governments have a mandate to protect the processes that keep us all safe, not just the crypto people. And so, I'm wondering, from your background, you have witnessed strife and civil unrest firsthand. You've been the offspring of a guy who is mandated to defend centralization. You've been then an entrepreneur in a very fun space, gaming, but with this background ethos of decentralization. So I feel as though there's a lot of contradiction. And I think you're someone who participates in democracy. I think there's not only voting, there's not only these instruments of society. You can create a business, you can create a structure and participate in democracy. So maybe that's what you're doing. But I just wonder, what do you think about all these contradictions?
Well, that's really true. Like, even growing up in the Philippines and growing up with the type of family that I have, like it's a different type of upbringing, right? And I got really exposed into the realities of life at such an early age, right? For example, like growing up poor is one of them. Like never had a toy, like for example, like G.I. Joe, like those really cool toys, never had that. So it's, I grew up in a farm in the southern part of the Philippines. And so it's usually, there's a lot of cows, there's a lot of like rice fields. And so your toy, your the way you play is the outdoors. So you create the type of play, right? It's always make believe. It's always like I'm Cyclops, I'm Storm, or whatever that is, right? And you kind of like have this consensual reality of how things are played in general. Like kind of like really kind of like I took inspiration from this sort of like upbringing in the sense that even though like me and my dad and my mom, we all have like different types of ideologies. My dad is like, as you mentioned, and you're actually right on that one, the defender of like the process of like the government in general, and me being a little bit more quiet and reserved just because I haven't found my voice just yet. But really like looking back, and really understanding exactly who I was or who I am as a person. I am I err more on the side of freedom in the sense that I want everybody to have as much opportunities as they can as I've had in the past. And I think a big chunk of that, it wasn't handed over to me as easily. You had to work hard for that. I mean, say for example, within the Philippines and within Silicon Valley, for example, I think a big chunk of like people who actually are able to raise money within the space needs to be somewhat connected somewhere, and needs to have like this sort of like level of friendship from funds or like whoever it is that they've known in the past. And so me coming in like a scrappy kind of like kid, not really kid at the time, like person from somewhere else who's an outsider, it was really tough like in the last couple of years, like just really trying to find my way in. And I think that blockchain in general and crypto in general has afforded me that it leveled the playing field in a way that wherever you come from, however you are connected with, there is a path for you that will actually enable you to succeed. And I think that's kind of like what does not exist in a way. Well, it exists, but it doesn't exist as much in the traditional sense. And I think that right now, there are people who can fund you just because they believe in you. A lot of like anonymous founders, a lot of anonymous backers, those that were empowered by crypto and are now sort of like passing on the torch to somebody else to actually carry over that sort of like, I wouldn't say luck, but rather opportunity that was given to them. I think that was a pivotal moment for me to realize that, this is my jam, this is my tribe, and this is actually where I wanted things to go. And in a way, like if I look back and try to really reassess how things are in my previous world versus how things are here, being exposed to these realities actually allowed me to appreciate crypto and blockchain and the opportunities it provides even more, because of the fact that I had to really work hard to get into a space where I'm welcomed and I'm comfortable, and that I can make a contribution and that it's appreciated. So it's a long process, but we got there, or I think we're still getting there.
Yeah, I feel as though all of us want a sense of belonging and worthiness and safety. So generally, to find belonging, we try to join organizations or achieve things for which others can clap about it. And to move forward in life, a lot of young people seem to rush. There's a sense of urgency and anxiety to get all the above. And so that could come in the form of becoming a state-ordained officer somehow, to become certified as a doctor or a lawyer. It could be to get on Forbes 30 under 30, become an entrepreneur, what have you, to be an influencer. But I'm not sure there really is a rush. I feel like throughout history, it's not as if any regular 20-some-year-old would run around starting companies. We actually have a lot more opportunity these days than ever before, and a lot more connectivity in the world. So if we feel like there's a lack of abundance or opportunity, we don't have jobs, skills are changing so fast, well, that seems like an excuse. And if we say, there's the social conditions around me don't allow me to do certain things, I think crypto has definitely shown that there's always ways around such problems as long as you can find people to help you. So not to say that everyone's struggles are not valid, not to say that entrepreneurship itself is easy, but to all those people right now who are thinking, I'm too young, or I'm not moving fast enough, or I don't know where I'm going, what would you say as someone who is CEO of a pretty well-functioning company right now, who's walked a long path to get here.
Yeah. I think, it's always not an easy road for everyone. I think like we all have our own struggles. We all have, crosses to bear in general. And, our situation, however it may look similar, on the outside will always be different from each other's situation. And that's kind of like where I really try to be very empathetic about like people that I talk to or people that I come across with. Just because I know for a fact that I cannot compare myself all the time with, what they're going through, no matter how different or no matter how it may seem like on my personal judgment, it seems like it's not too bad. But then again, you don't know what they're going through, right? But in my case, for example, I think, there's this level of grit that everybody has to sort of like really display. That level of resilience, like, as an entrepreneur, you always start with a passion, but then that withers down eventually, without that, kind of like mental toughness, that level of positivity and the amount of grit and endurance that you can take to actually carry on, without necessarily faltering and just giving up, right? When we started the company back in 2017, it was very early for the NFT days, but we were like, oh, okay, we're gonna build like NFT minters, and we're gonna build like NFT marketplace builders, and I was like, yeah, look, let's do this. This is actually gonna be an awesome idea. Like, we did that. Nobody used it. Well, fair enough. Like, there's not a lot of people like using NFTs or doing NFTs at that time. Like, it was like late 2017, early 2018, right? And we're like, why did we not succeed on this one? Like, it was like a fairly sound idea. It was an echo chamber. Like, a lot of us are like just talking about like how great things are, but not realizing that the market isn't there yet, right? If we did that this year, then it probably like it's going to gain traction. And so we did that, and then bear market hit. And so we had to make do of what we have left from our friends and family round. So literally for the last 2017 to 2021, early 2021, we were running on fumes. I chose a very inopportune time to move to Canada. I moved to Canada as soon as I co-founded the company. And that was the worst decision ever, just because like I came from a fairly cheaper country and then lived in Toronto, and then like, my runway was cut down into half. And so halfway through building the company, we were like, oh my goodness, like, I'm not getting paid. Like, I wasn't like, like since we started the company back in 2017, I only got paid this year, finally, right? But those are sacrifices that you're willing to make. So a lot of things where we're suffering, like my personal life was suffering, my finances were suffering. I'm not even sure if I can pay rent in the next 2 months. During that time, I was living in Toronto, so I was like, well, what do I do now? Like, and I was like, okay, let me try to move to like a much cheaper place somewhere in Canada. So I just basically look into Calgary, like smaller provinces in Canada. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll just move to Calgary. It's so much cheaper. It makes me, even though it's like really, really cold, it doesn't really matter. The most important part is like I survive, and that I keep on going and like making sure the company also survives. And so with that, I actually joined a lot of different types of accelerators, right? One being blockchain at Berkeley. A big chunk of the reason why, and I'm not gonna lie, like honestly, is like there are accelerators that actually provides grants, and so I've scoured into all of the grants programs that I could possibly receive during that period of time, so that we could actually build little bits and pieces of what we have now for OPGames. And that's kind of like you realize that there are ways as to how you can really get to where you are if you just really look for it. And like the biggest question in my head at the time, when I talk to people like you, is that like, when do you know when to give up? Like when are you supposed to give up, or like what are the signs that this is the end of the road for you? Because I didn't acknowledge that. Like at that time, I was like, okay, let's just go on. Like 1 year, oh, we're gonna get funded in year 2. It didn't happen. Oh, we're gonna get funded in year 3. It didn't happen. We actually got funded in year 4, right? And the struggle from founding the company to getting funded, for some people it's easy. For some people it wasn't. For me, for us it wasn't. We were seasoned, and we were tested before we were actually able to gain that momentum this year. And I'm thankful for that, because there's like lessons to be learned during the 4 years of struggle, before being able to actually get things rolling this year. And so I think that for people in general, listen to yourself, listen to what you feel about things, because giving up is not exactly a bad thing as well, right? I know that a lot of people would say, like, push yourself to the limit, do not give up, all this stuff, right? But there were a lot of times when I was like, holy shit, I have to do things, right? Like during the pandemic, for example, I was taking investor calls while stacking shelves at Walmart. I need to work somewhere. I need to actually pay rent. And so I was like, oh, okay, what do I need to do now? Like maybe I'll, take a job at a dollar store, like in Walmart. But that's extremely humbling. But you got to do what you got to do, because like you need money, right? At that time. And it's one of those things where you realize that, your struggles, how you respond to that is going to be a huge, huge product of what you'll reap in the future. And that I think is one of those moments where I realized, yeah, I'm glad I did this, and I'm glad I stuck up to it. Because then now I'm sort of like realizing that, there's value in the struggle that I've had. And I say to others, if you can endure this, then great. But I'm also saying that if this is something that's not within your limits, it's also okay to turn back, because the things that we chase in life is always going to be different. The path that we take is always going to be different, and there is no shame on any path that we take, whether it's through entrepreneurship or whether through somewhere else, if entrepreneurship doesn't work for us.
So there's the idea of willpower. You imagine a reality and you make it so. I think that's a very American way. It's a very individualistic way. It's a very entrepreneurial way. But then there's the opposite idea of a calling, that maybe you were born for a purpose, or maybe there's something which currently you're most suitable to provide and serve to the world. Yeah. So the idea of pulling King Arthur's sword instead of trying to go find it everywhere. What do you think about that dichotomy? And do you think you are walking a path where it's your calling, or more so you found willpower and that got you where you are?
Yeah, that was that's a really good really good question. I like that you asked that though, right? Because in the beginning I was actually like in this place where, I'm just really in too deep on this one. I've suffered enough that I don't think I want to turn back. And that's kind of like the mentality is like, am I doing this because I just, want to make all that suffering worth it? Or am I doing this because this is actually my true calling, and that now that the suffering is done, there are actually greater things that I can do for myself and for the people that I work with, and for the people that I am looking to serve in the purpose, right? And I have to be honest. Like in the beginning, I was like, it's just basically, I've suffered enough, so I'll just go ahead and continue on, right? And see through this thing. But then that epiphany goes back to you the moment that you're able to actually start growing your company and your team, and realizing that having these people come in and sort of like work with you on a shared vision, on a shared level of understanding, or even more, it provides me with further enthusiasm to actually continue on. Now that I'm realizing that, okay, it's just not, it's the reason why I'm here is not because I just suffered and that I just basically had no choice but to continue on, but rather it showed me that that it's not only me who sees things for what they are, but also a big chunk of the people in the company now are like, okay, we're sort of like manifesting a very common and shared vision and mission of like why we want to do this. And that sort of like reinforces the fact that, okay, even though there was a bit of like, kind of like a rough path getting into where we are now, I think that I'm not the only one. And this things is not just about me anymore, but rather it's bigger than myself. And I see that as an opportunity for me to be able to actually like continue on and hopefully make the company better than they found it when they started in the company. So I think it has renewed somehow. It has changed. But I'm not gonna lie, that in the very beginning, it was like all about, well, I've spent 4 years of my life here. It's basically just crash and burn, or succeed. That's kind of the option that I had. Like, because like it's easier to turn back like on year 1 or on year 2, but the moment that you're on year 4, you're like, that's a lot of investment right there. I don't think I can do it. Like I'll feel bad turning back. But I also feel bad like moving forward, because it's like, oh my goodness, like will this be another year of like hardship for me? So it's I guess like it's really a combination of both. And quite honestly, it's not always I'm not I consider myself not the archetypal kind of founder where like kind of like really out there. I'm an introvert, for example. That's one thing, and so like being in public events, it spends a lot of my energy, and so like I talk to a lot of people, but at the same time, internally, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm dying, right? And I would consider myself as a little bit more reserved still until now. I'm not the kind of like alpha founder personality in general. And in the beginning I was like, maybe that's gonna work. Not that's not gonna work in my favor. Because how founders are kind of like really seen to be always opinionated, always has a lot of things to say, always has a lot of the whole package of like how it is usually seen, right? And I'm not in that mold, right? Not at all. So it's good to see that I think crypto and blockchain is somewhat learned and enabled to diversify that. Because like if not for that, I don't think like I'll be able to feel like I fit in that kind of like culture. And so I decided, you know what, when building this company, I'll stay true to what I feel about myself, because it's the only way it's gonna succeed. If I mold myself as somebody else, I'll probably crash and burn and hate it. And so this entire experience is all about like testing things out, and see if it works for the person that I am.
Well, there could be listeners now who might one day work for you. There could be listeners now who look to you for some level of inspiration. So, in short, what would you say that your leadership style is?
If we ask like people in the company in terms of like how my leadership style is, it's always been this way anyway. Even before I started with OPGames, there's I provide a lot of autonomy to people that I work with. I trust a lot of them and all of them, just because before I onboard them, I make sure that there's this level of trust that I have for the people that is going to start working with me. I allow them to make mistakes. I allow them to really understand what their role is and how their impact works in the company in general. I'm not very hands-on in a way where you do this, you do that. I would rather look at it in a macro perspective and really enable them to be able to actually create solutions based on who they are as a person and as a leader themselves. And so I think like one of the things that I encourage a lot in the company is that like I don't like, in as much as I want them to be devoted into doing their jobs, I always wanted them, okay, why don't you guys join Gitcoin kernel? Or why don't you guys join like some DAOs or like some venture DAOs or even working DAOs, for example? Because I see the value of being exposed to these things because the better you become in terms of like your skill sets outside of work, the more it sort of like trickles back into the company and adds value to it, instead of just asking them to work 24/7 on the things that's solidly within OPGames. And so a lot of the people that works with me are actually involved in other Web3 projects, or I encourage them to get involved in other Web3 projects, even if that's also like doing something experimental outside of OP. Just because I feel that all of these experiences are relevant to how the company would grow eventually. And so I think like I'm more of like an enabler, less of a, well, hopefully enabler in a good way, but less of a kind of like person who basically dictates exactly what needs to be done.
Okay, wow. Yeah, it sounds like the opposite of your military father.
Completely opposite. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, that sounds like a dream. Okay, so I think we talked a lot about your growth, and we talked a lot about the struggles that had to be overcome in order for OPGames to exist. But I also want to show off a little because we're the same team. You came out of the Berkeley Accelerator. I set up the Berkeley Accelerator. We love that program. So, okay, let's talk about the wins. In the past handful of years, what are the wins that you were able to accomplish, and what can you boast about your team, your funding, your product, etc.?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest wins we had thus far, aside from the funding, of course, is that like during that period of time of that struggle, is we're actually able to actually build a solid team that was with us during the time that we had nothing, and all we had was this kind of like hope. All we had is kind of like desire in the future that this is going to happen, right? And so I think that is the biggest win, to have people with you during those periods of time that you have nothing to offer them. And I think that was kind of like very, very important to me moving into the funding round, because that allowed me to like see that, oh, okay, I'm not the only leader here. Like there's a lot of these people like within the company now that are actually like leading the way in several different product lines that we're building. So that's one. I think that's one of the biggest wins. Being able to onboard people that really shares and understands your vision, even at that time when you got nothing to give them.
And how many people is it at the moment, and how much did you raise?
So right now we are at about 30 people. It used to be me, and then Paul, and then 4 other developers. So like at least 5 people post a pre-race, and then we raised $8.6 million seed round, and then used that to actually grow the team in a short amount of time. And so now we're leaning to 30, and then hopefully by the end of Q1, grow further even more to about 50, just to sort of like accommodate all of the things that we're currently building. And that's kind of like really what's special about like what we're trying to do right now, because we're maximalists in some ways, myself and Paul, my co-founder, in the sense that the goal for OPGames in general at some point in the future is to be able to hand things over to a DAO. The entire company hopefully would be handed over to the DAO itself. Each of the product lines that we have are all open source. Anybody can use it. It's built in such a way that it's composable, so anybody can add to it. And a big chunk of like what's in the process of like governance within each of these games and the platform itself is sort of like built around the idea that at some point in the future, a DAO would own it, or a group of community of people would own it. So I think I'm also very, very proud of like how we are currently progressing in terms of our conversations with game developers. A big chunk of like where we want to focus on really is HTML5, specifically for the reason that HTML5 games are probably not the most, I would say, not really desired, but rather like not the most played games out there. It's usually on the mobile phones, right? But if you look at game jams, for example, if you look at all these things that are happening within the game development sphere, HTML5 games are the most underserved gaming segment in the scene. And the reason for that is because there's no pathway to monetization. It's either you use that for just having fun, or an entry to a game jam contest, or it's your hobby and you just want to sort of like create a following on itch.io or anything like that. But the truth of the matter is, it's as robust as any other game engine. It's just that nobody's built a monetization structure that allows these game developers to really succeed in this space. And that's kind of what we want to try to change. And so in the next few months, next few weeks, we are going to be announcing our publishing arm. We have a name for that already. It's called GM Friends. It's a publishing arm specifically bringing in Web 2 games into Web 3. This publishing arm is going to be headed not by myself, but rather somebody who I work with a lot for the last, I'd say, 11 years. He used to be with Facebook Gaming, and now he's going to start doing this for GM Friends. We've been talking to a lot of game developers at the moment. At least in the publishing arm, at least 10 of them will be in. And then there's going to be a very, very small accelerator arm specifically for games that we want to help move over from Web 2 to Web 3. So this is kind of like what's really exciting. It's going to happen this end of December. We're going to be announcing our first intake of games that we're going to actually bring in. And all of these games will be using OPGames tech and will be distributed in, it's called OP Arcade for now, but that's kind of like our metaverse of like games. But it will be available in January. So there's a lot of releases happening in place at the moment, a lot of partnerships coming up. And so I think that that's one of the most exciting things that sort of like afforded us to do because of the funding that we received. And so, to the investors who's crazy enough to invest in us, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who might need some catching up, think of non-fungible tokens, NFTs, as tokens that are not divisible. So if you get an NFT Bored Ape or something, then it stays with you. It can't be messed with and separated. And there's a lot of use cases for NFTs. They can be redeemable, collectible, whatever. And then DAOs. DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations. It's exactly what it sounds like. Imagine if some company or some service can deliver and execute without centralized structuring, but actually as a decentralized and autonomous organization. But that being said, Chase, I have some rapid fire questions for you. So are you ready?
Well, I have no choice. Yes.
No choice. Okay. All right. I like that. I like the attitude. Yeah. If you can't escape it, might as well get into it.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's see. Batman or Spider-Man?
Spider-Man.
Okay. Crypto or blockchain?
Ooh, blockchain.
Web3 or Web2?
Web3.
Berkeley or Stanford?
Berkeley, of course. Is that a trick question? That's a trick question, right?
Yeah, no, I'm just playing. Okay, real questions. What book are you reading, or have you read recently that you would love to share?
So there's one book that I'm reading right now. It's called Code Culture, and I think it actually talks about like how you can potentially build culture based on the philosophy of the code of the philosophy behind the code that you guys are building. We may think that lines of codes are essentially basically lines of codes, right? But the way we build this code is actually rooted towards our own experiences, and so I think that's kind of like where diversification is important, because whoever writes the code basically dictates the movement of the technology. And I think, that realization basically allows me to really make sure that, I'm more diverse in terms of who I bring into the company, writing these codes for us, that it's more inclusive.
Well, that was supposed to be a rapid fire question.
I'm sorry.
That was a
That's
good
rapid
answer.
fire. Okay, sorry. Okay, I'll make it more rapid then.
No, we can talk as long as we like. Let's go.
Not following instructions.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Favorite game you have played that is currently not popular?
Favorite game that I've played that's currently popular? Overwatch. Is it still popular? Yeah, I guess it's not popular anymore.
Gotcha. Your favorite fantasy world?
Oh, definitely. The fantasy world of Lord of the Rings.
Oh, that's what I was thinking as well.
I just watched it like a couple of days ago again. So.
Okay. And if there's one thing you're after right now, what would it be?
Aside from my dog, who's probably outside the yard, I'm currently after people that I can work with, because human capital is kind of scarce right now within our space. But I'm after people who I can share this OPGames vision with.
Okay, well understood. Then let's take this time to announce to our community. Number one, you got great funding. You've got a great team, so you're building product. Number two, you're hiring.
Yes, we are.
Anything else that you want to plug?
All right, so I want to plug a couple of things, right? So December 15, we are going to be closing our Arcadians Mint. So it's called Arcadians.io. So just a quick rundown of what an Arcadian is. It's like this. It harkens back to your like 8-bit Nintendo 64 characters, or Nintendo 8-bit or 16-bit Sega Genesis kind of like characters. It's a 10,000 PFP project. All of the proceeds of this Arcadians will go to our partner developers and open source game engines. So far, we've raised about $1 million, and we've already distributed them to all of our partners. So if you actually come in and get into this project, you're basically helping out the community. Second would be a game for the Arcadians will be released pretty soon, late December, early January. It's similar to Dota Auto Chess kind of like game. It not only accepts Arcadians, but eventually will accept any type of PFP project that will be included in the Avatar Battler game. So watch out for that. And then our accelerator slash publishing arm, GM Friends, will be released at the end of the month. So if you're a game developer, and you wanted to get into Web3, feel free to reach out either through our website. There's a contact information that you can actually send over to, or just reach out to me on Twitter, Chase Freo. And that's it. And watch out for our other products. But we're hiring and we're looking for people, whether you're in project management, whether you're in creatives, whether you're in development, most importantly, feel free to reach out.
So exciting. Well, thank you for being with us. I really look forward to coming back together when you have even more traction, when your team has grown even more. Let's keep in touch. And
likewise, Luke.
Yeah, if anyone in the community has questions, you know where to go.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much.